The 15.35 million is where our projected surplus is based on the August 5th board action. And for 2021, there's already 14.46 million allocated to help fund the program from prior years that the board approved in prior years. So now our target number is 29.81 million in a surplus position. First change is to increase to post 65 retiree contributions by 5%. So that's worth 1.66 million. And that increases the surplus from 29.81 million to 31.47 million. Next item is to reinstate the pharmacy coverage for all retirees, Medicare eligible retirees. That's worth 38.53 million. So that takes us from 31.47 surplus to a negative 7.06 million loss. So we'd be reflecting a loss of just over $7 million in 2021. The last item isn't really a new item, but these program initiatives are things that EBD and the vendors are doing for 2021. A lot of those are related to the pharmacy program. So when the pharmacy program is removed, the savings from those initiatives also disappear because they're directly related to the pharmacy spend. So by putting the pharmacy program back in, we expect to save another 3.41 million due to those initiatives. So that brings our deficit down to 3.65 million. I put on another line on there that shows the impact of Medicare retiree going voluntary. And I do some sensitivity testing around that later. My opinion is I don't think there's gonna be a lot of people that are for a variety of reasons. One you've talked about is the timing. I think open enrollment starts this week. That's for Medicare Part B. So there's not a lot of time for people to make those decisions. So we'll show sensitivity around that going forward. But the way that would work is anybody who opts out, those pharmacy spend that is associated with them reduces the surplus or reduces the deficit and it turns into a surplus. So as people opt out, if 5% opt out, 10% opt out, those costs disappear for the plan out of that $38.5 million. And I'll show that a little bit more. We're outspending our funding for 2021. And again, those numbers could change. You know, we certainly have another 4 months or so left in 2020 that would help roll into 2021. So we continue to monitor that and we'll look at that going forward. Now that what we just looked at was the income statement. So that's the look at the funds coming in and the funds going out in 2021. So I look at that as almost like your checking account. So the savings account are the assets you have available to help fund the program going forward. So at the end of 19, we had $96.6 million in assets. In 2020, 25.1 million of those assets were allocated to help fund the program and help offset premium increases. We're also showing about an $8 million loss in 2020 based on our current projections. So that's out of the checking account in 2020. We're writing checks for $7.8 million more than we're getting in revenue. So that leaves us with assets at the end of 2020 of around 63.8 million. As we roll into 2021, then we have $14.5 million set aside to help offset premiums and help fund the program that were done by previous boards. And then we're projecting $3.65 million loss in 2021. So that brings our assets down to 45.7. So you can see that between the end of 19 and the end of 2021, we've blown through almost $50 million in assets. And so let me show you what that really turns out. So here's a graphical look at the assets from 2018 to projected 2021. Now let's point out what some of these items mean. So the IBNR is in claims that have been incurred but have not been paid yet. So there's a lag between when claims happen, when you go see your doctor, when you go to the hospital, and when the vendor actually pays the claim. So we have to fund for those in the future so that we don't run out of money to help pay claims in the future. The contribution allocations and allocation for 2020 through 2022, those are the money that the board has prior surpluses to help fund the program going forward. So these are offsets to premiums, offsets to help fund manage it from year to year so surpluses and deficits don't materially impact their employees or retirees. And also there was a catastrophic reserve set up that's the 30.6 million in 18. That in 2019, the board made a decision to use some of that reserve to offset losses and help fund the program. So that number is down to 16 million right now. So, and for a frame of reference, for the state employee group, they pay about ballpark $1 million a day. So $16 million is about 2 weeks of claims. So if you had a really bad 2-week period, that fund could be depleted and there wouldn't be enough money to keep funding the program. So that catastrophic reserve is really important. It's important to probably get that back up to a level that it was before or even higher. And the last item is the unallocated assets. So that's just money that is unallocated. It's where the gains in any particular year have been greater than what we expected. And so there's money that hasn't quite been earmarked yet. And so what would happen with that going forward is that money would be pushed forward into the future to help offset funding. So half of that would be used for 2021, 30% of it would go to 2022, 20% of it would go to 2023, again, to help fund further down the road. Now what you can see there is, like that last exhibit showed, is that from 2019 to 2020, our assets have gone down by 32.8 million. And going from 2020 to 2021 projected, they're going to go down by another 18 million. But the real key thing is there that our unallocated assets are now negative. So we really don't have enough money in the fund to cover our catastrophic reserve, our IBNR, and our allocations for future years. Now the board could decide that, out of that $16 million, we're going to cover that $3 million loss, and that's probably what has to happen, unless there's additional surpluses that are generated in the rest of 2020 that can carry over into 2021. So the funding levels are low, and that's one of the long-term views of this to make sure that we're getting where we need to be. And the last slide here just shows the sensitivity. So the bottom bar there, that assumes that everybody comes back to the plan, all the Medicare retirees come back to the plan for pharmacy coverage, and that's the $3.6 million loss. 10% of the costs go to Part D, then it drops down to a $2.1 million loss. At 10% go down, it's a $0.6 million loss. If 25% go, it actually flips over to about a $4 million gain. So as those people move to Medicare Part D, those costs are gone from the program. So it helps with the short-term and long-term viability of the plans. That's all I have. Any questions?
Yes, let's just go ahead and take a break. And I know several members have questions before we move on. Senator Rager.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate you being here. I'll kind of scoot to the side a little bit so I can see you. And how long have you been the actuary for the plan?
We started January of 19.
So you just started January of 19, but you do these all over the country, correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you just for color, for the background here a little bit, so how many state plans of this nature do you support, provide?
Personally, this is my only state, but that's as a firm we support. I don't know how many there are, but I could.
It's a good number though, right?
We were the number of states.
Yeah. You also provide expertise separately and apart from these type of plans to actual Medicare Part D programs, right?
Right.
Okay, so that means that you actually, Middleman, as a firm, also represents many of these companies that might be recipients of the people moving off of the plan, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to lay that out there and make sure we understand that. So what your bottom line is that potentially some of your clients could gain some of these retirees as customers if they left the plan, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's just an important footnote. In terms of what you're recommending on this, number one, I think the essence of what actuaries provide to our programs is to basically keep us out of the ditch and give us forewarning. At what point did you inform anyone in EPD that you saw a problem?
The first time we presented it formally was at the March board meeting. And
March of 20?
2020, it showed over a $30 million loss expected for 2021.
Okay. And that, what was the root of those losses in the plan? It was not actually prescription coverage, was it? It actually was other expenses in the plan.
Prescription drugs certainly contribute to the losses, but I think the main root of it is historical funding levels more than the actual cost. I think the rate increases to the actives and retirees are pretty minimal over time. And then, as I mentioned before, in the 5 levers, the state funding hasn't changed since 2011 or 12, I think. The benefit design hasn't really changed over time. So really what's been happening is they've been dipping into the reserves to help fund the program.
Well, that's interesting because, we've had these reports given to us every year. And then when we had the health task force going, this was given to us very frequently. And, nobody was telling us that we had a problem with the funding throughout that entire period of time. And so really, to be honest with you, this is being presented as almost a sudden event. So if anyone knew that there was a funding problem, frankly, it's their fault for not saying something to you. See, once you started in 19, that there was a funding problem that was occurring from as far back as you said 11.
I said the state funding, the 420 per budgeted head count, hasn't changed. I think it went from 410 to 420 at some time in the 12, 13 time period.
But the fact remains, I would ask any of my colleagues here to please inform me if they ever heard at any point previous to the news breaking this year that there was a funding problem in the state employee plan, because, when we looked at the crisis in teacher employment, the teacher benefits plan, we went in and had a special session, put $40 million in to keep their premiums from absolutely going through the roof. And then we had some other changes that were made to assist that in the sessions after that, And so and always there's a parallel given of the public school, the ASE plan as opposed to the PSE plan. And we were always advised that it was doing pretty good. And so I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So you're telling me that the first time that you raised a hand on this issue was March of 20?
Correct.
Okay. And we didn't hear about that in our committees. We frankly heard about it in the news. So I've asked about the costs, and everyone that I've asked about the costs tell me that the prescription plan is not the problem, that it is expenses that were in other areas of the plan, be it your medical expenses, your hospital expenses. Those costs were probably the reason for these burgeoning claims in the plan. And so I'm having trouble, other than the fact that maybe this is an easy thing to recommend to change. That's what I don't understand, is that typically when you have a problem, you try to address the root of the problem. You don't get rid of parts of the plan that are not really the problem. Now, obviously, we all know that if you just ditch the plan, it's going to save money. I mean, that's easy. But what's odd about that is you ditch the part that's easy to fix, but you didn't fix the part that's really the problem, which is going to continue to be a rising cost issue. So have you thought about that and had that discussion?
We have looked at benefit design changes. We have talked to the vendors about things that are occurring in the medical plan. One thing I will clarify too is that during those years, when the funding wasn't changes, typically what would happen, there would be cycles of good years and bad years. Lately, there's been bad years after bad years. And so,
what was the root of that?
well, usually what the main driver is what we refer to as a high cost claim. So people who have extremely high cost, it could be a preemie, it could be a heart transplant, it could be things. Those things are high cost, low frequency events that are very difficult to predict. And you see that from time over time that, one year you might have, a spike in high cost claims and the overall experience of the plan is bad. The next year it cycles the other way. And so those ebbs and flows of those high cost claims have a major impact on the overall cost of the plan.
And so what rationale was it that was made a decision? And I know I'm talking to you because you're the actuary, and I know they're gonna turn to you when you have a problem and say, actuary, what do you think? So who is it that decided that it was a good idea to just slash all of the retiree prescription drugs?
That was an EBD proposal.
So that didn't come from you, all right? Well, I'm sure you'll have some comments about this here as we go forward. So all I want to say, and I'm not trying to be too hard on this, but you're paid to keep EBD out of the ditch. You're paid to keep them out of trouble. You've been here since 19. It's like all of a sudden.
You know, we were engaged to start in 19. We didn't actually get to take over the full actuarial role until the fall. So we started reporting in the fall. Our first look at 2021 was once we had enough of the 19 data to project the 2021 data. So we brought it up at the board meetings in March, April, May. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to close off. I want to stay on the topic at hand, though. Mr. Howlett, you're the one, he said, that proposed to make this decision. So, first of all, I want to ask, are you the one that made the proposal to make this decision, Mr. Howlett?
I asked Courtney Millman and his team,
And if you would go ahead, Mayor.
I'm sorry, Chris Howlett,
Yeah,
Chris Director,
thank you.
to actually have Millman model the request. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I want to ask you, who decided to make the proposal to get rid of the prescription drug benefit?
As far as the modeling and those pieces, that would fall on me.
I'm sorry, I don't guess I quite caught that. Say it again.
That would fall on me, the modeling of that.
Well, so you're saying you did that, it was nobody else in the administration that advised you that this would be a good approach and wanted you to fulfill that?
No, sir, not to that degree, no.
All right, that's all for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, I'll just ask that you be patient. We do have a long list, but I am going to, at this point, move to Representative Wardlaw. Recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, we'll kind of go down through a little timeline here, but at the end of August, I was made aware of this issue, and I was told that there was $48 million deficit, and that's why we were cutting out prescription drug plan. I sat here this morning, I learned that we need $3 million to fund it because we're going to take $26 million out of numbers that fit whatever plan a department wants to do. I want to be told the truth, and I think this committee and the people of Arkansas deserve the truth. What are the actual numbers? When did we actually know of the deficit, and when should we have started addressing it? Maybe you can start because you were the one who started giving me these $48 million numbers in the first place.
Thank you, Representative Wardlaw. The $48 million is the amount that the state paid and spent on the cost of the prescription drugs for the 65 plus retirees.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I keep going for a second?
Yes, you may.
So that's easy for you to cut out. So you're actually going to be making money on this cut compared to the deficit you actually have for next year.
So after the $48 million cost, we received approximately $10 million in rebates and refunds on that prescription. So we get to a $38 million loss saved. We cover the prescription plan for this popular $1 million reserve. So the plan you're seeing today leaves us in a deficit with no reserve. The plan that we presented to your committee at the end of August left us in the black with a reserve fund to fall back on, not knowing that this is a projected for the end of 2021 and not real numbers. So that's the difference. That's leaving the state with a surplus reserve fund, or it's leaving the state with a deficit and no reserve fund.
But it goes back to Senator Rayford's question. The actual issue causing this cost rise, and y'all have admitted to that. But yet you're cutting it because it's easy, because the teachers $1 million deficit. And you're right, you are in the black a year from now because you were making half of that money back to the plan. You're 100% correct. Later in August, you told us in August that it was a $48 million deficit if we kept that plan. And that's not true.
I'm not sure where you're getting the 26 million from. Did you
From
explain
your
that?
report today. I got text from you right here. You said you had a reserve of 26 million, you're gonna take 3 million that you've asked us to help you budget, that's $29 million. That's the actual deficit. It's not 48 million, which is what we were told.
In my text to you during the committee meeting, I said, I thought it might be $26 million. I looked back on it and I corrected myself and said 29 million.
So it's 29 plus 3.
29.81 on the presentation that you were shown.
Then you asked us for an appropriation for 3 million a while ago in your opening remarks.
No, sir, I just said, we're going to, if the numbers stay constant, we are going to have a deficit with no reserve. So the plan falls back on its reserve many times throughout the year. So we will have a projected deficit of 3.65 with no reserve fund to use that way. So I don't know that the ask would be 3.65 million. I don't know exactly what the ask would be at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I'll hold.
Thank you. I'm just going to take the order that these came in. Senator Hammer.
Sheridan, these are going to be to Mr. White, just to nail down the time frame. I know it's a little redundant, but when did you get started on this project, Mr. White?
We began our contract on January of 19, but the prior actuary was still in place until second board meeting.
Okay, who's the previous actuary?
The firm was Chiron.
Okay, and when did you make your first proposal to anyone with regards to a potential fix to what you had discovered? Now, let me put words in your mouth, but what you had discovered was
A loss. We also presented at the April and the May board meeting. At the May board meeting, we actually showed various levers, the employee contributions, the plan design changes, the state funding that could be done to help offset the losses.
and that was of 20 or 19. You said, I think you said May of 20.
May of 20.
Okay. And you're before us today with solutions that I would have thought would have been in the initial discussion, other than just pushing them off to the Medicare D plan. So in the April, May meeting, when you presented what you thought would be suggestions to improve the plan, were there other options on the table other than just putting the population off on the Medicare D plan?
That option had not been discussed yet.
What options were discussed at that meeting?
Increase in employee contributions, benefit design changes, increase in state funding.
And the cost, the price tag associated with those was what?
They varied. We showed a table that showed that, for every 1% increase in employee contributions, it would save X million dollars. Same thing for plan design changes.
Okay. And were you ever instructed to not share information with any of the legislative branch in your discussions with the board or with administration that might have given us early indication of this problem?
That was not.
Okay. And did you look at separating the medical from the pharmacy in order to find the savings that we need to sustain this plan without having to push the retirees off of the pharmaceutical plan?
I don't understand the question.
Did you look at the medical spend to the plan and try to come up with a solution as to how to find money to savings so that we would not have to push the retirees off onto the Medicare D plan?
Yeah, so we looked at different options for increasing the active and pre-65 deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums.
And what, is that represented in any of your handouts here today, or what was your conclusion?
The changes were relatively small, and it's not, there were no, the board did not recommend any plan changes.
Okay, then the final one is, in the presentation you're making today for a suggestion to resolve this, what will the cost be to the high-end users of the drugs? Because, we've had discussions that some may actually benefit if they're pushed off to the Medicare D, and some may not, that they'll hit their dumb hole faster, and, we're getting calls from people that it's going to be financially devastating to them. So how would the proposal that you're making today impact those retirees who use the high-end cost drugs?
Based on this proposal, they would have the same impact it has on them today. They would stay in the plan and get their coverage through EBD.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of different questions. When you refer to preemie, you're talking about premature babies.
Yes,
And do you recall how much those changes in deductible plan and raising deductibles or making changes to the plans, how much those would have resulted in? Dollar figure, because we don't have those in front of us. Or even a combination of raising premiums plus deductibles, how much that would have netted, or changes in plans.
1 second, I have that presentation here.
Mr. Chairman, can I add one thing? There is a spreadsheet in your packet as well. I do not know what exhibit it is, but it was sent over that has all of the suggestions that came in either from legislators or from retirees that goes through the suggestion.
I appreciate that, but again, I want to know the dollar amount.
It's exhibit D1A, the
Right,
spreadsheet.
Those are suggestions. I'm asking a question to Miller.
So a 5% increase across the board to actives, early retires, and plus 65 was worth about $5 million. If we increase the deductible by $500 so this only applies to the actives and the pre-65s, increase the deductible by $500 and increase the out-of-pocket max by $250, that was worth $4.8 million.
So both of those would be above the 3.6 million. That's the baseline you have projected.
Correct.
Both of those would be.
5% is already in there for the pre-65 and the actives.
Okay, but the 4.8 million to raise the deductible off 500 and the out-of-pocket cost up to $250 is 4.8 million, which is more than 3.6 baseline that you're projecting if nobody moves off of this prescription drug plan and into Medicare Part D.
Correct.
I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that Senator Raper mentioned that Milliman represents people that represent these Medicare Part D plans. That makes me very uncomfortable. I want to also say that, did any of y'all ever contact the chairs of Insurance and Commerce about this? When was the first contact that EBD made to the chairs of Insurance and Commerce about this issue? Senator Raper said that he found out about it by reading the newspaper, as did I, and I'm a member of this committee. So when did you, EBD, contact the chairs of this committee?
I did not personally contact the chairs.
You did not personally contact, Ms. Fletcher, did you personally contact the chairs of this committee?
No, I did not.
Okay, so we read about it in the newspaper and then we get slammed. I'm gonna give you my timeline, okay? This is my timeline. We read about this decision in the newspaper in the middle of a pandemic. Who are dying of COVID right now? Who are the people dying? I can name you five church members that have died. They're all over the age of 65. That's real. In the middle of a pandemic, we make a decision to get rid of a prescription drug plan for retirees in the state of Arkansas. And one person made the decision to have that modeled. One person. We have 135 elected officials sitting in the Arkansas legislature.
Wow.
We have a constitutional officer. Lots of them. We get blown up by emails. This is my timeline. I reach out, what in the world's going on? I have no idea how to answer these emails. I text back to some of them. Thankfully, some of these state employees that are retired are lawyers, and they're CPAs, and they're auditors. So guess what? They're skeptical, because they've been down this path before. And we can go down that path again. We've had some issues with EBD in the past, before any of y'all got there. So then my timeline comes to all the emails that I receive. So I call and have this on the agenda for Public Health, Welfare, and Labor Committee, correct? And then we have this hearing. And then it goes to Peter. Senator English and I have a long, and we contacted Senator Raper. I'm sure other people did as well. This is my timeline. I've already been asked, but I want to say on behalf of Ronald Birch, William Raines, John Callaway, Ryder Wright, Charles Ellis, Wilma Stewart, Keith Garrison, Jim Weather, Lexon Faye Dobbins, Eddie Selvey, Mary Jones, Faye Mosher, and that's just emails in the past week. If I went back to August, I'm sure the list would be a mile long. I want to thank them for their emails, and I want to thank them for their diligence in being here and for advocating and standing up when they see something wrong that's happened. And I am not disputing the fact that we have rising healthcare costs. We all know that. We're adults here. We understand that. But we also understand that there are ways and there are solutions. And if you have just one person making that decision, that's not the way this should work. I have a real problem with that because we are thoughtful people. We are considerate people. And we are elected to represent these people of the state of Arkansas. And we're here to make sure that there is no inconsistencies or improprieties that occur. That's our job. And we were denied the ability to do our job. That is my timeline, and that is why I'm so angry. I think that the discussion is appropriate. I think this committee is appropriate. I think these chairs should have been notified. I am disgusted that they weren't, because they would have contacted us members, because that's the way they are. They're professional adult people. So that's my timeline. And until you can prove me otherwise, then you can give me yours. But that's what we're here today to do and get to the bottom of this. So I understand that this reserve is the problem, that we don't have reserves. That's why we're understanding we're not going to go down this other path of changing the design plan or of raising the deductible, because that's just not going to give us enough reserves. Is that the crux of the funding issue here?
Yes, ma'am. The increase, what we've been, and I'm familiar with many of you, having been director during the last few years of the task force. The reserves actually bridge the gaps between your peaks and your valleys.
Right.
We've been very fortunate over the last several years to be able to have successive years of reserves, and we burned through those with increased claims costs. The volatility in the claims day over day, month over month, we spend roughly $10.5 million a week in claims. So you have a $40 million swing at any one time. So from that standpoint, as we burn through those reserves, yes, we found ourselves 18 months from now, that we're going to potentially have a problem. The utilization for the claims is the sole crux of the whole issue.
Right.
We're having the benefit. People are utilizing that benefit. I have no problem with that. That's what it's there for. But we're sounding the alarm that the utilization is up. We're burning reserves, and if this continues on the same path, we will find ourselves at point B down the road. The reserves and what's demonstrated here, that is kind of the all-in piece. We don't have that safety net, if you will, that ease those peaks and valleys. We hope that the claims will come down, but in the same sense that they do not, then we're going to sound the alarm, and we're doing it now.
Great, thank you. 2 follow-up questions that are very quick. Number one, there's a difference between sounding the alarm and already making a decision.
Yeah.
So sounding the alarm would have been, hey, we got an issue, let's figure this out together, and let us help you figure that out. That's sounding the alarm. This is past that point, in my opinion. Thank you for the latitude, Mr. Chair. I may have other questions later.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm going to call on Vice Chair Lindstrom, but first let me just say, as I pointed out at the outset, we're glad to hear that there is a solution to help all these people that Senator Urban listed and many of us could list that have contacted us that wanted to speak today, retirees. So we want to fix the problem. We have plenty of time to fix the blame. And so members, I've got a long list here. We will conduct hearings between now and the start of the next session to actually come up with solutions which might end up pointing the finger of blame. That will probably be a time that's more appropriate. But I just want to preface that as we try to move through the list of. So Vice Chair Lundstrom.
Thank you. One of the things, things don't happen in a vacuum. It's not all of a sudden thing. Growth in cost of insurance happens over time. I'm wondering why we didn't have an increase in the cost or an increase in the copay from 2010 to 2018. This thing just didn't, the bomb didn't just go off. We're an insurance actuary. These things don't happen in a vacuum. I'm wondering where the board was on this. Where was everybody? It looks like everybody was asleep at the switch and all of a sudden the taxpayer is handing the bill.
I would agree with you, Representative Lundstrom, and you also have an exhibit that shows the historical contributions on the public school employees and state employees going back to 2009. And there are very few increases throughout that time point. So I would agree with you, and that would be a question for the board back in those times, why there was a decision made not to make an increase either in the state funding or in the contributions.
I have a sneaky suspicion because nobody wanted to man up and make the big girl and big boy decisions, and they figured they'd just screw the taxpayer from the time and use emotional blackmail on us.
Just like Arkansas.
And figure, just like they did with the teacher situation, they had a midnight session funded with $40 million and send a bill to the taxpayer. And it's getting a little old and it's getting a little stale. From 2010 to 2018, they simply could have had a small, even a 0.05% increase or a deductible increase or a copay increase, and this wouldn't happen. I've got the same phone calls that Senator Irwin did, and it's pretty shocking to go, I have no clue what's going on. And the retirees simply made a comment, we could have had a small copay increase and this would have been no big deal. But obviously they just want to dump us on Medicaid. They just want us to go away. That was the message that was sent and that was the message that was received. So I'm looking for solutions. I think the chair is correct, but the solution isn't dumping people. I'd like to hear some solutions from y'all.
I think the current proposal is to add the Medicare retirees back in, so they would still have coverage. As I mentioned at the beginning, that you hit the nail on the head. It's the 5 levers, and using those levers every year to help manage the increasing costs, whether that be small increases in employee contributions every year, 1-2%, or slight change in deductibles, or also some of the initiatives that EBD and their vendors do. That's the way to slow and steady over time is better than a big hit at one time.
Do we have a board that's going to man up and get that done, or do we have to step in and do it? Because obviously it didn't get done for the last 10 years. I'll just send my comments to that.
I'm going to recognize my co-chair, and then I'll be going to Senator Ingram.
Thank you, Chairman Lowry. Couple things, again, there's a lot of things coming out in the discussion, and I want to make sure I heard one thing correct before I move on. Secretary Fetcher, you said you agreed with Representative Lundstrom. She said several things in there. So what specifically did you agree with? That the board was asleep at the wheel? Because that's really the part that jumped out at me. So I'm just making sure I understood this correct.
I wouldn't want to speak for a previous board. What I was agreeing with is that there should have been a more steady increase, smaller increase in both the cost to the member and the cost to the state over the last few years.
Okay. And then what you said, in the changeover from Caroline to you, did you articulate to them that there was a point? Is there something there that you might want to pull out for us a little bit that, would be helpful to us?
I think as the advisory plan, we make recommendations about things that can be done to help. Those aren't always taken. So ultimately, the final recommendation comes from EBD or the board. We can advise them on, when we showed the scenarios in May, it showed the $30 million loss. And, as I noted, a 5% increase barely made a dent in that loss. So there need to be bigger changes or things, and we point out things, need to be happening over time. As I mentioned, the small and steady increases are going to be, less felt by the employees and the retirees out of pocket, but also the shock of trying to plan for those over time is easier too. So, we certainly pointed out that we think that the keeping pace with the trends year over year is a better approach.
So maybe a slight change in some of the recommendations might attribute to maybe almost a cliff from what we had been being reported to now. Is that what I'm hearing?
That the change in recommendations would be the way that those would be handled. Like we can model a wide range of scenarios and provide feedback on those, on the pros and cons of those. But I think ultimately I don't know what kind of information EBD or the board gets from other sources to help form recommendations either.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And before I run to Senator Ingram, let me just also commend, at this point, Ms. Fetcher, I know, reached out to the speaker, and the speaker reached out to me asking that there had been conversations, members had possible solutions, and could we channel those to you so that the actuaries could model it and be able to come back to us with a solution. And that's exactly what's happened. That's the way the process should work. And hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to participate more in this process. The legislative branch will be able to participate. So at this point, I'll recognize Senator Ingram.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Let me first say that I think that there are no retiree catastrophic insurance. Do we have reinsurance? Do we buy reinsurance for catastrophic?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, so we bear all the burden that's all self-insured. Mr. Howlett, I asked you a couple of weeks ago, what percentage of made up the claims of hospital, docs, and pharmaceuticals. You were going to get your fund. I can promise you the business owner knows to a penny what percentage that they are being paid. So let me ask you again, what is the breakout percentage-wise of your hospitalization, your docs, and your pharmacy?
If I may, that information, we were responsive to that. I'm sorry.
I never got it.
We sent it to the analyst for the committee, and as well as the deputy director for EBD, Mr. Leda Tolles, had a conversation with you on the phone and submitted similar information back to you and to someone in the Senate, one of the Senate constituent services, I believe. I'll be glad to get that information and re-forward it. I don't have them exactly.
Gosh, I asked you this 2 weeks ago. You'd think you'd look it up and know it. Any